Dr. Anne Huang, I would like to say welcome. It is an absolute pleasure to know you and to know your work, and you as a woman, a cultural strategist, and just an extraordinary being and leader here in the Bay Area. So I want to welcome you on behalf of the San Francisco Foundation to our first Arts Thursdays interview. And, the goal of the Arts Thursdays is to highlight the progressive work and change that's taking place within the Bay Area arts and culture community, and also to hear and see how working artists and cultural strategists like yourself are reimagining how we in the Bay Area can stay rooted in our communities, civically and politically engaged and connected to each other. So I look at the work of World Arts West and your work with the organization at the intersection of immigrant community, cultural arts, and power building. And so I'm just completely honored to have you here with us today talking about the work that you're doing and why this work is important for the Bay Area, but also nationally as well. So let's just start off. And can you tell us about yourself and how you came to be executive director of World Arts West?
Thank you, Esailama. Thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this interview. Right back at you as far as how much I admire your work, Dr. Esailama Artry-Diouf. I'm originally from Taiwan. I am first generation immigrant. My family left the country during the height of the martial law in Taiwan, which was between 1949 and 1985. Members of my family were under persecution, as many people were. My grandfather was on the execution list, in fact. And so my family came here to hope to have a better life for ourselves. I feel that that directly led me, that was the genesis of my social justice work today, actually. Family who had experienced a lot of injustice. And after coming to this country, I personally, as a teenager, I came here at age 12, I personally experienced a lot of racial discrimination growing up in different school districts. And then my own dream to go into the performing arts was also sidetracked because of, my family wanted me to live out that immigrant dream of going into the sciences and getting degrees. And I ended up being, getting double majoring in chemistry and biology and working as a dentist. Along the way, I always kept my practice, my singing, my dancing, my piano playing. And then when I was a young dentist living in San Francisco, I was living very close to Third Wave Dance Studio. And I would walk by and I would always hear this live drumming and wondering what that was. One day I walked in and I met the wonderful Miss Blanche Brown, decided to take her class to see what it was. I can say that class in 1991 really was struck by lightning, meaning I had taken dance classes before. I had never taken a class with live music, live drumming. I had never been in a class where there were women and men of different body shapes and sizes feeling so empowered. I had never been in a dance class where there was such a strong sense of community. I had never been in a dance class where we all sang together. I had never been in a class where, now looking back, I realize came out of a cultural tradition that it still is very much misunderstood. And I felt the strength, I felt the beauty, and I felt the spiritual connection, which I had never experienced in dance class. Something within me kept taking me back, and that changed my life. That put me on a particular trajectory. I started exploring different dance classes that gave me the same feeling. Then I ended up studying Afro-Cuban dance classes fairly seriously, first with Jose Francisco Barroso. One reason I was able to study with him for so long is because of a funder commitment back in the 1990s of supporting individual artists teaching in the community for free. So I was able to take 3 years of free dance class with Jose Barroso. I know that one grant of one artist changed the lives of so many people that I know today. So So I ended up volunteering for the Ethnic Dance Festival back in the early 90s, going to many, many festivals over the years. And I realized that this organization that serves this community, which when it was founded in 1978 was a small grassroots community of cultural artists, now serves the largest world dance network in the country, is really the only organization in the Bay Area and beyond that serves immigrant cultural artists, cultural bearers in dance to this degree and for over 40 years. So it's been my longtime dream to work at some capacity for this organization. And along the way, 20 years ago, I became the executive director of Oakland Asian Cultural Center when I left dentistry. And it was then that I started organically doing capacity building work for artists. Over the last 30 years, as I've been in this community, I've seen on the ground so many cultural artists who have multitude of challenges: financial, lack of administrative support, and art forms being misunderstood by funders, lack of collective voice as far as advocacy, and constantly navigating both externalized racism and internalized oppression. All of these firsthand observations that I have been making the last 30 years are the foundation of what I do at War Arts West today. And I'll say by saying War Arts West, we've been presenting the Ethnic Dance Festival for over 40 years now. It's great. This is a juncture now that we need to serve our community more holistically by by organizing collective advocacy, by doing artist service, capacity building support, by creating, designing, and expanding our programs through the racial and cultural equity lens with a very deep understanding of what are those oppressive challenges that our cultural arts communities are dealing with.
Wow.
And I would like to talk a little bit about maybe how I specifically came to be the executive director the last 2 years.
Well, if you could let us know how that transition happened. So one of the questions as you were speaking, I was thinking about how your migration story, right? Because we always talk about native lands and migration experiences and how that shaped you as a cultural bearer and cultural leader here in the Bay Area, and shapes your work as a cultural leader here in the Bay Area. And then in addition to that, I like what you mentioned about serving the immigrant cultural arts community more than just putting folk or traditional arts on stage, right? Providing that capacity building and that technical assistance that many working immigrant artists need as well. If you could speak just a little bit to what World Arts West envisions that work to look like beyond performing arts being placed on stage, the wraparound services, right, for immigrant cultural artists as well.
Yeah, so Esailama, there were two questions, right? Sort of my migration story and also War Arts West work today. I want to say, many nonprofit organizations serve underserved communities, right? It's in many organizations' mission, right? In order for the nonprofit organization to authentically and properly do that work, you must, number one, have the constituencies' voices represented very strongly in the design of the organization's programs and implementation, and ideally have executive leadership coming from the constituency. So 2 years ago, when I was appointed the executive director of War Arts West, it was a watershed moment, as in I am the first immigrant artist to lead War Arts West. I am the first person of color to lead War Arts West. I am the first ethnic dance festival artist to lead War Arts West. And I am the first true internal hire, as I'm the first person that's actually comes from the constituency to lead this organization. While I want to be humble in saying that as one person, of course, I could never know the needs of every single community that we serve, over 450 dance companies. But I have a much deeper awareness of this community's needs compared to past leadership at this organization. In the 2 years I've been in ED, I've spent a lot of time getting to know artists on the ground, what's happening with everybody in pandemic, and also getting everybody's needs. I would just say, I would summarize by saying, every cultural artist that I speak with, their personal story is either my personal story and or my parents' story and or my grandparents' story. So I can say I have a deep understanding of the journey. The cultural endangerment, for example, it is directly related to my migration story. I come from a culture where our home language does not have written text. And that is, it's very complicated, right? The big cause is sort of serial colonization of my homeland in the last 400 years. And I myself feel a great sense of urgency as far as cultural preservation because of historical cultural endangerment. And I'm also deeply aware of cultural sustainability does not mean preservation of cultural practices, music, dance, language, food, and so forth, statically. Culture is always evolving and always changing. Culture is resilient and culture is innovative. Culture changes when people migrate from one location to another. I speak 4 languages. One of the languages I speak, Mandarin, the Mandarin written text is drastically different than it was 50 years ago. So my migration story of feeling very, very, very connected to my homeland, even though I've been away for quite some time, resonates with how many cultural artists practice their work, whether it's a Hawaiian artist who is deeply cognizant of how the Hawaiian language almost disappeared in the 1970s and how they are part of the work to making sure that the Hawaiian language is preserved as part of the larger Hawaiian sovereignty movement. And you, Esailama, have told me about the importance of supporting Liberian artists outside of Liberia, because so many of them are doing the cultural preservation work that is very difficult to do, inside Liberia. That is, that's happening. That's also the truth for various cultural artists from other cultures. And your War Arts West question, could you repeat it again? You said today, how are we supporting immigrant artists?
I was saying that the work that World Arts West is doing in terms of more than just presenting folk and traditional arts is also working to support these artists, these working artists, right? So if you could talk more about what does your constituency look like? You mentioned 450 dance companies, right? That's quite a bit, because think about 450 dance companies. Each of those dance companies may have about, anywhere between 5 and 15 company members, right? So in terms of just more than presenting World Arts West, what are some of the other services that World Arts West does and offers to its constituents?
Yes. So in the past 4 decades, the community that we have served have grown quite a bit in number of artists, arts educators, and dance companies, right? So artistically, the community is very robust. And but if you look at a typical dance company in the World Arts West community today, a large dance company would have 2 paid staff members, right? That aspect really has not grown whatsoever. So this particular community that we serve really needs more administrative support, more financial support. We need to shepherd more funding sources, and we need to also build an entire community of arts administrators, fundraisers, grant writers, executive directors, marketing folks, production folks to support these dance companies, right? War Arts West does not need to help artists grow artistically. I mean, we can, but what's really, really, really missing is kind of the capacity building. So last year, I launched a grants accelerated program at War Arts West. It is an annual cohort of cultural artists and cultural artists advocates who we are working with them to increase their capacity to access grants. This being able to sort of access financial resources is a big component of building capacity of these dance companies, as well as training, capacity building, and doing professional development of the arts administrators who come from these cultural arts communities who can serve their communities. That I hope funders will, in the next 3 to 5 years, will commit to more funding to support this kind of capacity building work. I am also working with some funders to do capacity building on their end. For example, Dance USA, right now they're launching a $1 million grant artist fellowship program. During round one, I worked with them to implement not just technical systems, which some funders do, but a very innovative artist coaching component as well. And that really diversified the final grantees of the Dance USA fellows, the 30 fellows. It was so successful that this year, current round two, right now, they're accepting applications. Dance USA, instead of hiring 3 coaches, that was in round one, Dance USA, I believe, is hiring between 5 and 6 coaches. And so I really, really hope that becomes a model in our field, that funders, when they're launching new programs, have both the technical assistance components provided by the funders and also a separate component of artist coaching. First come, first serve, so it's safe. So it's fair, right? So that is one hope that I have, one that is designed well. When you're launching new grants, it will really help the funder have a diverse pool. And regarding War Arts West cultural artists, that is one component that's really missing as far as being able to access grants. The capacity building work, like the Grants Accelerator program, and also the artist coaching and technical assistance on the funder end, all of that. And I wrote an article about this in Dance Magazine a few years ago that I'm happy to share. And I would also say another thing that I'm working in War Arts West is beyond the presentation. This is the time where we are really telling our stories with our own voices. And it is very important that we bring those stories beyond backstage of Ethnic Dance Festival and rehearsal rooms. So I'm really trying to push myself and cultural artists to speak on panels. In June, I was able to be on Dance USA panel with Mama Naomi, Alleluia Panise for the Dance USA conference. In September, we did a similar panel for the National Association of Latino Arts and Culture National Panel. In January, I will be leading a session at APAP called First Time BIPOC EDs, BIPOC Evolution Through Revolution. And I really appreciate the opportunity today to tell our story. At War Arts West, this is new. I would just say, historically, our stories have been told, but not been told by us.
As I listen to you, Anne, some of the phrases that come to mind are when we talk about radical imagination and we talk about collective action and power building, all of what you just talked about has a lot to do with those terms or those phrases that many throw around and use. But what it sounds like is World Arts West is taking those terms and into action, right? So what does it mean to have a radical imagination about an organization that has historically, and I love the idea of you saying, lifting up its constituency to become the leadership within the organization, right? Bringing the constituency with and through the organization, and the voice of that constituency leads the organization. And so as we talk about equity and what does equity really look like and what do we mean, that's a very clear example. I'm thinking about radical imagination, and I'm pondering what does it mean to talk about collective action, and all of what you just mentioned is really resonating with me as I think about those things. What also resonates with me is as I think about artists as truth tellers. Paul Robeson and Harry Belafonte have always throughout my life resonated strong with me in terms that they were not just artists, but artists who used their platform for activism and political action, political education, movement building, true radical imagination. So as we think about this idea as artists being the gatekeepers of truth, and in this moment, this transformative moment that we're in as artists and organizations are recovering and rebuilding and thinking about reimagining themselves, what might be some legislations and policies impacting working artists that we should lift up and build power around, so that artists can continue to be those truth tellers? Are there any current legislation? So I know there was work around Prop E, there was work around AB 5. So are there any legislations or policies that you feel we need to pay close attention to that are going to help working individual artists or immigrant artists that you can think of?
Well, right now, the Prop E money in the city of San Francisco there's implementation phase. And this week and next week, there are 2 community meetings. And there's been a lot of complaint from the artist community about how that money is being implemented. So I would say Prop E is a great example of the artist community really advocated for the passage of Prop E. And there were extensive community meetings with the entities that is using the funds for the community, right? San Francisco Foundation, Grants for the Arts. That went really well, that particular phase, as far as getting community voices to design the implementation of the funds. In the actual implementation of the funds, and I realize this is the time of the pandemic, has not been great. So right now, there are multiple community meetings for the community to show up to say, this is how we want the money to be implemented. This is what I mean is oftentimes there's a legislation with good intent, but when it comes to implementation, oftentimes it's problematic. So to me, oftentimes the problem is not getting some kind of legislation passed, is to make sure that the constituency in which the legislation is supposed to serve is they're in a driver's seat all the way from passing the legislation, designing the implementation of dollars that are coming with it, the entities that will be receiving the funds. That's the problem that's in Prop E right now. The entities that will be receiving Prop E funds, then how is that money doled out? Is it equitable? That's where we are. That's where the problem is right now. So yeah, so again, similar to War Arts West, it's great to have a program at War Arts West. It's great to have, I think, Dance Festival, right? But if the people designing War Arts West programs are not from the community that we serve, then the program is a great idea, but the program is not implemented. equitably.
Yeah, and I think you raise a very a good point where many of us are saying it's not just about the legislation or the policy or the measure being passed, but then there's a level of accountability, right? Who's holding those policymakers or those measures accountable for the implementation, and how is it being seen forward? So even, there was a conversation, the convening that where folks were discussing about, yes, who's designing these measures and legislations, but also who's on what organizations are there to help the follow through process, to the implementation process, and make sure that those dollars or the benefits are impacting those who are closest to inequity, right? Or who it's supposed to serve. And then on the back end, to make sure, on the evaluation end, on the follow through end, to make sure to measure the impact and make sure that it did indeed serve the purposes that it was initially designed to serve.
So for example, at this time, Esailama, quite a few funders are really reflecting on their programs and redesigning, pivoting their programs. I've been part of so many focus groups where funders ask for mine and other community folks' input as far as how they can design their programs more thoughtfully. We have these focus group meetings. That's it. There's no more involvement. They take our input, go and design it in silo. We have no idea what's going on. By the time the new grant program is fed back to us, our voices were not included. So the programs are not that useful. So then it creates resentment on our part, the community's part. How we feel is like, well, then what is the point of giving our input if this information is going to be taken in a way that is not going to be properly implemented? So I really, really, really want to advocate for, as far as legislation and funders designing new programs, please, please, please include us, the constituency, in the entire cycle of the new grant program.
That was a mic drop, Anne. That was a mic drop.
Yeah, I will be there. I will be there.
I just want to take the time to say thank you again to you, Dr. Anne Huang, for your work and your vision and your leadership here in the Bay Area, and your commitment to World Arts West, the Ethnic Dance Festival, and the immigrant arts community and the cultural strategist community as well. And we look forward to continue from San Francisco Foundation working with World Arts West. And I also want to take a moment to thank Jamie Brooke and the Marcom team here at San Francisco Foundation for being able to hold us down through this interview process and making the vision come to fruition. So Anne, thank you again. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And we look forward to more great work from you and World Arts West and the team that makes this all happen.
Thank you. I really appreciate your time today. And I will conclude by saying at World Arts West, our era now is, for the first time, for us, by us, our stories, our voices. This is the time.
Thank you.